Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Prince George Daily News and PG Talks. I'm your host, Bill Phillips, and we have our regular panelist, Tracy Calogheros, with us today, but we also have a special guest, Laura Parent, who is the NDP candidate for Prince George-Valemount in the upcoming election, which is just 2 days away. Make sure you get out and vote if you haven't already. So your time is running out. I think we're back down to only election day if you haven't voted yet. So Laura, let's turn it over to you to give a little bit of introduction about yourself, and then we'll just start having a conversation.
Sounds good. So I'm pretty sure you all know who I am now if you're watching this. My name is Laura Parent. I'm the BC NDP candidate for Prince George-Valemount. I was born and raised here in Prince George. I've spent my whole life here. I'm in my final year of my degree at UNBC. I'm studying political science. And up on the hill, I'm the vice chair of the University Senate. I was elected to Senate, I think 2019, as a student senator, and I was just re-elected for my second term. I'm the vice chair at the Senate, which is so much fun. I love to be involved in the university community that way. I'm involved in a bunch of different clubs up the hill, Model UN, debate, Political Science Student Association, a variety of others. It keeps me pretty busy doing all those things, but I'm also a scout leader. I talk about scouting so much. It's kind of one of my passions in life. And outside of that, I've been involved in the NDP for close to 4 years now. I've worked on a variety of election campaigns, everything from provincial, local, as well as federal, and those are lots of fun too. I'm currently the riding president for the Federal Riding Association for the NDP of Peace River's Northern Rockies, Prince George Peace River, Northern Rockies, sorry. And I've been on the local executive of the provincial New Democrats for about 3 years. I think those are the important things about me. I guess if we want to get into the political side, my priorities for Prince George-Valemount are seniors care and seniors accessibility in care, as well as gender equality, accessible services in the north, including education and healthcare, and continuity and stability in government.
Right on. So one of the first things I think we'll ask you is you've been involved in politics, but why run and why now?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a bunch of things that kind of contribute to why I wanted to run now. I think the best way to explain it is when I first got involved in the NDP 3 years ago, there was a young female running named Madeleine Lalonde, and she was running in Vancouver, Calgary. At the time, she was the youngest candidate running in the province, and she was so passionate and so driven and so goal orientated. And I got to meet her a few months after that election, and she was so inspiring. And she kind of really expressed to me that young voices have a place in politics, and people is really what kind of drives politics. So every election cycle since then, whenever we mention elections, all the eyes in the NDP room would turn to me, and it was kind of just a matter of time. But I think what really did it this time is I'm pretty pleased with the kind of government that John Horgan has created. I think it's clear that he's making a people-first government, and that's something I really want to be a part of, and I really want to make sure that Prince George-Valemount sees those changes and those effects here and in our riding.
Tracy?
Sorry, just figuring out my tech, unmuting. Yeah, I would agree with you that I think people have to be the central push for any elected official, and certainly for policy development. There's been a lot of criticism about the call of the election right now, and that in fact is the opposite of putting people first. And I wonder if you'd speak to that a little bit for us.
Yeah, I think whether we have the election now or in the spring or in the fall, it's starting to become clear that we're going to be in a pandemic whenever it's called. Unfortunately, that's not what I want. That's not what anyone wants, but it's kind of the reality we're looking at. And I think the people of British Columbia have a democratic right to have a say in how we move forward. We're starting to hit that vital time where we're looking at economic recovery. We're assessing whether what we've done so far has worked or not worked. And it's British Columbians need to have their say and have their input in those kinds of conversations.
Well, that's certainly been the argument that John Horgan's put forward, but I would suggest that the party leader, Jagmeet Singh, has said, in fact, almost exactly the opposite around the notion of a snap election federally, and he's made it really open that he thinks that going to the polls right now is a really bad idea, and yet I know he's been here supporting the BC election. So how do you square that circle?
Well, the federal NDP is quite a bit different than the provincial NDP. There's a lot of very different factors at play there. I think the big kind of thing that we need to consider federally is the fact that we did just have an election a year ago, and there's, election fatigue is definitely a thing. And here in BC, we're getting towards the end of the NDP's term. So holding off federally, I think, is a little bit more realistic than it is here in BC.
But to express such conflicting views, I mean, that just opens the door to the accusations of hypocrisy. And I know that there's been a lot of talk about the walking away from the contract with the Greens and ignoring the legislation that's in place for fixed election dates. I even saw something that there's a group that started a case claiming that this election's illegal. I'm really struggling with how within the party, you're getting both arguments, I guess, at different levels. And I'm really having trouble as someone who's looking at where do you vote and how do you vote? Because as a federal Liberal, for me, there's really not an obvious home for me here in British Columbia politics. The BC Liberals are definitely not federal Liberals. So I've been looking long and hard at the NDP, but I'm struggling with this difference. So what do you say to federal Liberals like me that are sort of looking for a home in BC and are currently feeling like they can't trust what's coming out of the Premier?
I would say we need to look at kind of the evidence in our policy, especially in northern BC. We've had new surgical towers, new hospitals across the province. We're getting new advancements at UNBC. I think the BC NDP is about creating a policy that is balanced and fair and reasonable, and really wants to ensure that British Columbians are heard. Like I said, I encourage people that are questioning the legality of the election to turn to their legal matters. That's why we've got a wonderful independent judiciary system that's active and can do their job. But in the meantime, it's important, as I said, that British Columbians kind of get that say, and they have a place to voice their opinions. And who knows, maybe the province is super unhappy with the way John Horgan has dealt with things, and they have the right to have that opinion and make that heard. But they also have the right to support the Premier if they're happy thus far. This gives us some stability as we work forward in our pandemic planning and our economic recovery and all those different things. So for federal Liberals, I would kind of sum that up to say, look at policy, and at the end of the day, pick what is best for you and what suits you the best in your views and the party and the leader that you think is going to support you and your family the best.
Right on. And for the record, that group is Democracy Watch, the group that is launching an action in the courts challenging the British Columbia election. I think they said they didn't want to overturn the election or halt the election, but they feel that they want to make a point that it's illegal.
I think they lost, didn't they, when they had a similar campaign when Harper called a snap election or forced a snap election. I forget which way it went, but I'm sure they lost at the courts at that time.
Yeah, could very well have. And I guess from what I understanding, what could be the heart of the case is when the government sets legislation, whether they can actually change it, which is kind of what Horgan did. Just switching a bit here, Laura, we do have a question from someone who's watching. Cherry Cloeric wants to know what you're going to do about the ambulance service in the north.
That's such a good question. Ambulance services is something that I've kind of been passionate about. I was speaking about that last week in both McBride and Valemount. Obviously, paramedic services are critical in northern BC, especially where we have large highways that aren't serviced as often as they maybe should be. We have people traveling on those highways, lots of tourism traveling, shipping, movement of people and goods. And our paramedic services are critical, especially with our opioid crisis. Our paramedic services are being used a lot in Prince George. I think the story that kind of really broke my heart a little bit was last week in Valemount. One of the counselors was telling me that the paramedics in Valemount will bring people to Prince George for hospital treatment there, and they end up staying there, filling in shifts in Prince George. So I think there's a bunch of different issues here. The first of which is obviously just the number of paramedics that we have. So I'd like to see our training opportunities expanded across the province to train new paramedics and providing the infrastructure to have paramedics locally, whether that means buying more equipment or expanding our current existing facilities. Those are all different avenues. But the second part of that is looking at wages. Unfortunately, paramedics aren't paid with the respect that they deserve in this province. I know a paramedic personally that works in Vanderhoof, and she gets paid $2 an hour when she's not on call, which is crazy to me. It's also classed as a volunteer time, so you're not eligible for things like WorkSafe. So this particular paramedic fell and hurt her shoulder while on the job, but was on the $2 an hour volunteer time and therefore wasn't eligible for any WorkSafe compensation. And that is beyond disappointing to me. It's frustrating. Our rural paramedics especially service all kinds of reserves, highways, as I said, and their importance cannot be understated or overstated, sorry. So expanding our facilities, better training opportunities, and bringing the wages up to what they should be.
Right on. We could just switch up a little bit again. Here in Prince George-Valemount, how is the campaign going here for you? And I know you made, I think you caught some fire over your comment when you launched. You said that Shirley Bond is tired. What's your take on your competition?
Well, so far the campaign's been really great. I think the messaging that we have is really resonating with people. And I think when we look specifically at my tired comment, I think in a lot of ways it was fair. Look at the BC Liberal policies. They're really just recycling the same platform that they've used in years past. And that policy itself is tired. We need some change in Prince George-Valemount. For the past 19 years, we've had a lot of the same. And I think people are recognizing that and realizing that. And we know it's time for something a little different, a new face in the legislature, a new voice for the region, and that brings new opportunities.
See, all of that's a fair argument, Laura, but your comments were very specific to Shirley Bond personally. And I mean, you and I have talked in the past when I ran, and it's the personal attacks in politics that I find so off-putting. And so to make the comment that Shirley was tired and needed to spend more time with her family, I mean, that's a very specific comment on Shirley Bond as a human being, not on policy.
Well, I preface that comment by saying that Shirley has dedicated an unbelievable amount of time to this riding, and she has. I think I remember Shirley as a child, just looking at the big MLA, and she was so fantastic. But 19 years as a government official is a lot. That's a lot of work and a lot of pressure. Shirley has, I think she's served our riding really well, and she's done her time. But it's important to have some new faces in government.
I think it's also important, though, to treat each other with respect. And I think if you're going to talk about tired policy, then talk about tired policy. I can't imagine describing Shirley as tired, quite frankly. You know, and it's not just those comments that you made at the beginning coming out of this provincial campaign. There's been a lot of talk about Nathan Cullen and the remarks that he's made.
That's where I was going next.
All you, Bill.
Yeah, no. So I was just going to ask you, like, obviously, you see during a campaign how comments can so quickly come back to haunt you, I guess. And Nathan Cullen is one. Have you? What's your take on his comments and what he should do? And is Horgan perhaps being a little hypocritical by not asking him to step down, such as Laurie Thronis did with the Liberals?
Well, I think the comments themselves were surprising to hear from Nathan. I know Nathan to be a very dedicated, very diligent government official, and he has done, I would like to say, I think, a very good job in his time as an MP. So I was a bit surprised to hear the comments. But at the end of the day, it's not my decision or my say about what Horgan does or what Cullen does. I think it's important to remember that the Haida Nation acknowledged Cullen's comments and they didn't take offense to it. So I trust that John Horgan can make the best decision of what he feels necessary in consultation with Nathan Cullen and the necessary parties moving forward.
So why don't we shift gears a bit, Bill? I'm sitting here looking out at the remnants of what was the Island Lake fire in 2018, and the North burned in 2018. And I spent a lot of time then advocating for more attention, similar to what you were talking about, Laura, with the paramedics. Can you talk a bit about, as an MLA, how you would ensure that Northern BC and Prince George as that central hub becomes vested with things like a base for wildfire response or a shift in paramedic supplyment, that's not even a word, paramedics in person in North, I can't come up with the word, I think I'm too cold. You get where I'm going, right?
Yeah.
How are you going to get us the
Just answer
services
whatever you want now, because you can't come up with a question yet. No, just kidding.
What? Don't pick on me, Bill. You can do this alone.
Okay, that's a big question. I think in 2017, when we kind of had that huge season of fires and all the evacuees here in Prince George, at the time, that was when the NDP were first just taking power. So to deal with forming a new government and trying to get all of that underway, and then having a provincial crisis on hand is a lot. And it kind of highlighted where we need to do some work. So I think one of the first things to advocate for Northern BC is I would look at our facilities. Sometimes it can feel like the Northern BC is quite lacking in the services and the facilities that we have, and we can't have services unless we build those facilities first. So focusing our efforts in our forest centers is one thing, expanding our training opportunities here in the north, and then building up our other surrounding facilities. Things like our airport can use lots of supports, being a base for firefighters to come into, supporting in groups like the Red Cross. They do really great work with evacuees. I was really, really honored to be a volunteer, for the fire evacuees. I did a lot of work cooking, actually, for evacuees. Little things like that make a really, really big difference. When I was cooking for evacuees, I noticed something kind of random, but we didn't have funds to get desserts for people, and little pieces of sugar sometimes can change your whole world when you have been evacuated from your home due to a crisis. So funding groups like that can really have an on-the-ground impact for people that are affected by these disastrous effects. So that's kind of the first thing. And second thing is looking at our climate change rates, and better research to understand and assess how our climate impact affects our forests and our forest fire rates. This past summer, we were quite lucky in Northern BC that we had minimal forest fires, but that doesn't mean that there were none. They were definitely still there, and we had the smoke from the southern fires, just as that reminder that this is still a problem globally, and this is a problem that touches us right here in our own backyards. So expanding our facilities, our services, our training, and looking at our support organizations and better understanding how we can support them to do the work that they do.
Okay, and just following up on that, we have a question from Mike Ingert. I hope we got his name right. You're talking about those kind of things, but his question is, where does the money come for the facilities that you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. Budget is always the thing on people's minds. I'm really proud that the BC NDP was one of the first governments in British Columbia in recent years to produce a balanced budget. That's really important. Responsible spending is critical. So we've done a variety of things in BC to kind of adjust our budget. The reality is that with COVID, we're probably going to be in a deficit, just as we will be federally, just because we have to get money out to people really, really quickly and soon. But reassessing some of our other priorities, looking at different ways we can redivert tax money and spend money more effectively is kind of the biggest key for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no question that all levels of government are going to be broke for a very long time to come. And I'm curious how you see yourself as an MLA fitting into that discussion when dollars are going to be hard to come by. And it's pretty easy to ignore us up north, as has been evidenced over many, many years. So how do you change that? How do you do it differently than our existing MLAs have?
Yeah, so one thing that I'm really happy that the NDP has done is they're trying to make life more affordable. So by doing things like cutting MSP fees, which was the biggest middle-class tax break in British Columbian history, that puts money back in people's pockets, particularly people that tend to be on the middle and lower class income scales. And those are the people that need it most, and they can spend that and redivert that into the economy. So as an MLA...
You there, Laura? That was good for nonprofits. As someone who runs a nonprofit, that cut helped nonprofits too.
Yes, exactly. I'm so glad to hear that. Those are little things that make a big difference. The MSP fees was really frustrating to me because people that make $500,000 a year were paying the same as families that made $30,000 a year. So that's so unfair for a tax. And by getting rid of that, like I said, and like you said, it has real benefits. And that whatever it was, $98 fee really means a big impact for families. So making smart choices like that is one of the ways that I hope to continue to contribute, can't talk today, to those budget discussions. My priority is to ensure that our small businesses aren't overly taxed. Small businesses are the backbone of the Canadian economy, especially in BC and especially in northern BC. Our small businesses contribute so much to our economic life, our social life, cultural life, all those different things. So keeping their tax rates affordable, maintainable, I don't want to see those increase, but looking at other ways that we can diversify our revenue base as a province.
So
Where you're talking about revenue too, what about Site C and things like the caribou recovery and all of these things that have impacts that are economic as well as social and recreational, and how do you get all of that pulled into one so that you can fund the resources you're talking about and still maintain what we need to from an economic and environmental standpoint?
Yeah, those issues are huge, and so many people have so many important opinions. So I share the BC NDP's approach in taking a scientific-based approach to these things, meeting with all necessary stakeholders, including industry partners, local advocates, First Nations groups, and anyone involved to understand the best way forward. It's really important to have balance in government and take a balanced approach. So balancing our need for things like biodiversity with our need for economy and industry, as well as our social life and working government to government with First Nations. And that can be a really tricky balance. We've seen that in the past here in this province, but it's important balance to find nonetheless. And lots of consultation, lots of engagement, and lots of work to understand and make the best choices.
mm-hmm. I guess one of the criticisms following up on that would be the caribou recovery plan, where the consultation came after the fact, as far as a lot of people in the north were concerned. Where do you see that that plan moving, the caribou recovery plan, and do you think the government has perhaps learned how to consult a little better going forward?
I like to think they definitely have learned to consult better. Obviously, it's a lot of people to consult. It's not an easy task just to say, oh, we're going to consult people. It's important to look at what that actually means. So meeting with First Nations, spending months of research and study and working with our scientists and our experts and our interest groups and all these different people. Big process, big task, but still critical nonetheless. I think moving forward with the caribou recovery specifically, I'd like to see more of that work and revisions to the caribou recovery plan as it sits now.
I think the trick there is going to be, how do you get all of the competing interests at the table and get them talking to each other civilly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really hard. There's a lot of groups and a lot of really strong opinions and feelings either way. And I admire those people that are so passionate about their cause. That passion is what drives politics. That's what drives Northern BC. But yeah, working civilly, it's a hard task to manage, but I'm confident that it can be done.
Mm-hmm. Just moving a little bit, but another big issue in the riding you want to represent is it was revealed pretty much on the eve of the election that the provincial government, which would be the NDP government, has approved logging in some of the inland rainforest east of town, and that's a concern for a lot of people who want to preserve the inland rainforest. And to make matters worse, it was the cutting license was given to Pacific Bioenergy. So some of those logs will be chewed for pellets. They have since said that they will try to sell some of the better lumber to mills or better timber to mills for lumber in trade and that kind of thing. But that's a possibility of a big issue up here too, with protecting the inland rainforest. Where do you see that going?
Yeah, it's inland rain growth, inland forests and old growth forests are a continued discussion that we have in this province. The BC NDP likes to take a science-based approach and ensure that we're meeting with all those stakeholders. It's important to remember that there are so many divided perspectives in northern BC. I was meeting with a representative the other day who insisted that we needed to log all old growth forests because that was what was best for industry. And if you don't have industry working, people don't have jobs and they can't pay for their kids' educations or Christmases or any of these things. And while that is a really important concern, and I understand the importance of jobs, it's also important to protect our biodiversity. British Columbia is one of the most fortunate places on earth in terms of our environment and our ecosystems. And I think it's important to view forests as an ecosystem, as a whole living thing, as opposed to just an industry to exploit. So finding that balance is really hard. We released, as the BC NDP, we released our old growth report that protected certain areas of old growth forests across the province. That report was created as a result of many, many months of consultation and work with biodiversity experts, scientists, First Nations, as well as advocacy groups. But that's definitely something we need to continue to examine in northern BC. With regard to this specific Pacific bioenergy, I've heard a lot of concerns about this, and those are really, really valid concerns. I trust that within our ministry and within the Minister of Forests and the Ministry of Forests, we have the necessary mechanisms to ensure that anything that is being done correctly and appropriately and to the pre-existing standards. But if we were to form a government further down the road after Saturday, or whenever we find the results out, we will continue to look at those policies, those laws, and potentially tighten them to ensure that no company is allowed to kind of skirt the rules and do things that aren't within the best consideration of our forests.
So just to be clear then, you're saying that you support the logging of the interior rainforest in our riding because the government's done its due diligence?
No. I support taking a balanced approach. Where there are specific concerns about any specific company, I support the ministry taking what steps are necessary, what disciplinary steps are necessary. That's up to our ministry staff, who I think are more than capable. I support a balanced approach, protecting our old growth forests.
So then you don't support logging the interior rainforest?
No, I don't.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get at. I wanted to know what you personally thought and what you as our MLA would be doing. So should you be elected on Saturday, or as you said, whenever we get the results, would you stand up and stand against then the licenses that have been granted and the access to the interior rainforest?
Yes, I would be as vocal as I can about protecting our rainforest and working with our scientists to ensure that that's the best choice that we can make.
Thank you.
So how does that extrapolate into the forest industry in general, which has been having a tough time finding fiber? So a lot of the licensees would be arguing that they need fiber and it's just not there. So how will the NDP help the forest industry survive and thrive going forward?
Forestry is a huge question on everyone's minds right now. I come from a forestry family, so I totally understand that concern. I think it's important to remember that there were reports presented to the legislature as early as 2012 that predicted serious forestry problems in northern BC. And here we are today dealing with that same problem. It's unfortunate that it was kind of swept under the rug for so many years, but I do look forward to being able to improve it. So one of the ways that we've done that is opening employment offices in rural communities, including Mackenzie. While there hasn't been one open in Prince George-Valemount, I would advocate really, really strongly to open a forestry office in probably McBride, or an employment office, sorry. That's where the previous one was, and it was closed several years ago, and I'd like to see that opened again, providing community services. So looking at diversifying our economy is really, really big, and continuing to meet with those stakeholders to ensure that we're getting appropriate fiber supply. We know that the solutions are out there and we're working on it, but it's a slow process, unfortunately. I know that's not what workers want to hear, but as an MLA, I would continue to push for it and continue to work on the pre-existing efforts that have already been made to, again, keep people working and keep people employed.
Yeah, there's no question that forestry is not an issue that is held within a 4-year election cycle. This is something that is generational.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we, as British Columbians, we're all seeing that now. This isn't just, a 3, 4, 5, even a 10-year thing. This is, something that we have to plan for even 60 years in advance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's my worry about the old growth forests. I mean, we're talking about 400 and 500-year-old trees and ecosystems that have taken even longer than that to establish themselves. So when we're talking about needing fiber, that's not the fiber, in my view, that you look at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and one of the criticisms, of course, and you had nothing to do with this, is that when they protected the old growth, they neglected or they didn't choose the old growth east of town here. I think they protected 11 sites of something like 11,000 hectares or something across the province, but that one was omitted. But just following up and switching a little bit, but kind of on the same subject, another question from Mike Engert, and this one's probably should be easy to handle. What about hemp?
What about what? Sorry?
Hemp.
Him. Yeah. What about him? I, as an MLA, and even as someone that has the chance to have a say in our government, whether I'm elected or not, people first is what's really important. People matter. That's why we're here. My priority as an MLA candidate and as a potential MLA is to hear people, to listen to people, and to recognize that I don't know everything. I don't understand everything. I can never begin to understand what other people are going through and what their life circumstances are. And my job is to hear them with compassion and kindness and represent those voices and those issues and concerns as if they were my own.
Excellent. However, I think you didn't hear me. I was asking about hemp.
Oh, hemp! I thought you said, what about him? Like it was like a personal, ooh, sort of hemp. Great question. Hemp is a really, sorry, that was bad on my part.
Here. All this digital stuff's a pain in the butt. No, don't worry about it. We'll teach Bill to enunciate.
The world of digital, yes. Nice. So hemp, BC hemp, that's an awesome question. I'm really excited about the BC hemp project. I think it represents a really interesting era of economic industry that we're getting into in northern BC. I think it's fascinating. It's such a cool technology that we have here, and I'm excited about getting projects like BC Hemp to northern BC, to Prince George, to continue to build us as an economic sector.
You've talked a lot about listening to all sorts of different people, Laura, and I absolutely believe you when you say that your goal would be to listen compassionately to everyone and then to represent their voices in government. So I'm wondering where you stand on a minority government. Like in my view, I think that the government we've had has been really successful because all of the voices have had to be heard in order to be able to move forward. So I'm wondering, I don't know, just where you see this landing. We go back into a minority government. How do you see that working? If we don't go into a minority government and say the NDP win a majority, which is obviously the goal of the Premier, how does that facilitate then hearing all these other voices that I think deserve credit for some of the success that we've had over the last few years?
Yeah, so locally, I think that means MLAs meeting with people on the ground, making themselves accessible, whether, especially in an online world. So we can't have offices that people come into and wander and sit and chat for coffee, but we can do other things. So looking at our on the ground supports to ensure that every constituent across the province of BC is being heard. But then on a provincial level, I'm really a big fan of things like committees that are cross-partisan that allow people to do all kinds of great work. I think in our COVID-19, especially in our initial days, we saw a lot of really, really great nonpartisan efforts to do what was best for the province of BC. And like you said, that is when we work best. That is when things go the best. That's when we get the best policy. So cross-partisan committees. Another great example is the Clean BC project, or the Clean BC policy. That policy was co-developed between the NDP and Dr. Andrew Weaver, the former leader of the BC Greens. And he was proud to be a part of that. And I'm proud as a New Democrat to have him have been a part of that. So working across those lines, creating policy, consulting with everyone, that's what we need to do to ensure that everyone is heard.
Right on. We have another question from a viewer. You're getting lots of questions from people watching, which is excellent. We have a question from Amy D'Angelo. Okay. I know Amy, but I don't know how to pronounce your last name, so I hope I didn't butcher your last name there, Amy. But she says that COVID-19 has really impacted working moms really hard. So what will an NDP government do to help working moms to try to lessen the load of what's going on with COVID and dealing with all that craziness that is COVID?
Yeah, so first part of that is universal $10 a day childcare. I believe, and we believe as the NDP, that childcare shouldn't be a barrier for anyone in their lives. We know that childcare is often a burden that's placed on women, so there's a huge gender inequality aspect here. There's also a wealth inequality aspect. I think prior to the NDP, our childcare sector was kind of left out of the question regarding regulation and policy. That's something that John Horgan worked on right away when he became the premier, is improving our regulatory standards for childcare centers. So I would continue with that, as well as fully implementing $10 a day childcare here in Northern BC and in Prince George-Valemount, expanding our childcare services, both public and private, encouraging the education of ECEs, so we have proper, qualified, trained people working with our kids, and remembering that childcare is a critical issue. So yeah, $10 a day, make it universal, better training, more ECEs, both public and private.
Yeah.
What is the NDP plan for rebuilding the economy? Like, obviously right now we're all in a mess and nobody trying to project into the future is like reading the tea leaves. So I get it. I'm asking a hard question here, but all I'm hearing from every candidate, every party is about all the things they're going to do to spend, which I agree. We need to be spending right now, and now's the time to borrow. Governments can borrow more cheaply than individuals. I buy all of that. But sooner or later, we got to pay the piper. So what is the NDP plan to look at that, whether it's 5 years from now or 10 years from now?
Yeah, so as we were kind of saying before, and as you just said, this isn't a short-term conversation. This isn't something that we can look 6 months or a year or 2 or 5. We're looking at a 10, 20, 30-year plan here. So part of that is looking at our cross-partisan efforts to ensure that all parties are comfortable with what we're doing. There's no one kind of being left out of that conversation. And immediately we're looking at borrowing, providing funds for people, keeping people employed, keeping people with their wages, keeping businesses open, keeping renters stable. All of those things are really, really, really important. But long term, this will mean things like reassessing our spending. Whenever I talk about spending, I always think of that issue a couple of years ago under the Clark government with like the $10,000 wood splitter. Does anyone remember that? That's whenever I think of responsible spending, like, yeah, no $10,000 wood splitters. Check number one. So making sure we're being smart with the province's resources. We're continuing to expand our economy and taking this COVID-19 pandemic as an opportunity to look at our economy as a whole. Are there ways that we can diversify? Are there ways that we can expand things? One of the things that we're really passionate about is expanding our tech center in BC. Quite often, I think Northern BC gets left out of that conversation about tech centers, but I don't see any reason why Prince George can't be a tech center and a tech hub. We've already got some really amazing resources here in Prince George that we can expand upon and look at building that economy as well. But either way, it's clear that this is not a short-term conversation here.
What about internet access across the north? If we're going to expand tech and we're going to do that in the north, we do not have the cell service or the internet service to support that.
Yeah, that's huge. Broadband is essential, especially when you are traveling to communities throughout the riding like Valemount, McBride, and Dunster. There's no cell service on a large portion of that road. So when the NDP took power in 2017, one of the things they looked at was expanding service and broadband access to the west of town, which is fantastic, along the Highway of Tears. That has a big impact, especially on crises like the missing and murdered Indigenous women genocide. Those are all important conversations to play into. So definitely expanding that east to Prince George and throughout all of Northern BC. There's no reason in 2020 why we don't have complete cell access across this province, especially on our highways. So expanding that and keeping people connected.
Just previously you talked a little bit about, keeping track of expenses and that kind of thing. But one of the things that an NDP government is going to do by Christmas, they say, if you get elected, is give every family in the province $1,000. ostensibly to deal with COVID. But isn't that basically just trying to buy votes? Or do you see that as buying votes? It's certainly been criticized for that.
I think I see it more as ensuring that people are financially stable and they're not so worried all the time. I think when we're looking at federal programs like SERP, that was a really, really great way to keep people with money. We know we're heading into kind of this tough season. Even something like seasonal depression, we know that increases in the winter, has a lot to do with someone's income and their ability to get income and their ability to provide for their family. We have Christmas coming up. We have just had the fall with school back to school and all those and extra costs. We have things like extra heating costs, particularly in northern BC. So that $1,000 is meant to ease some of those burdens for people. If we can, do something like providing money, if that helps a family, then I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be done. And I hope regardless of who comes into power, if there's a power switch or a party change, I hope that's a program that will continue.
We're just getting back into the election overall. What will happen if there's another minority government? The polls are right now saying an NDP majority, but polls have been wrong before. So if we go back to another minority, regardless of who's in power, are we not basically back in the same spot we were before and have accomplished nothing?
Well, and like you said, the only poll that matters is election day. If we move forward and we get another minority government, then we get a minority government. That way we know where British Columbians' priorities lie. We know what they want to see and we know what they're critical of. And it gives us an opportunity to build better policy that way. Same thing, like if the NDP takes a majority, then we know that they're happy with the plan on board and we're ready to keep moving with that. If they get a minority, then we know that let's listen to the other members of the legislature and create better policies.
Mm-hmm. Tracy, you gonna follow up on that?
Yeah, no, I take that argument. I think that it makes sense. I mean, you can argue the value of an election right now just as easily as you can argue the value of not having one right now. And I think that you're seeing that within the NDP nationally. I can accept both arguments for different reasons. But I will say, Laura, that I'm really thrilled to see you running, not just because you're a young woman, but I have met you in the past. And I know personally how tough it is to put yourself out there. So as much as we've beat you up a bit today, I'm very impressed that you're doing this at the age that you're at, and good for you. And I think you've got a long future ahead of you, regardless of what happens on Saturday.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, putting your name forward and being a young person to put your name forward is very intimidating. I've been the subject of a BC Liberal attack ad, so that's it's interesting. It's interesting to be in that position, to be the subject of an attack ad. I kind of check it off on my bucket list, like, yeah, there's an attack ad about me. That means you're moving things and you're kind of shaking things up and changing the way we view things. So yeah, go on, bring forward the attacks. It only makes us stronger, and criticism makes better MLAs. Criticism in government makes a better government. Taking the partisan hat off for a second and going back to my political science roots, we know that criticism helps. Criticism of me helps me be a better person, helps me be a better representative. And regardless of whether or not I get elected, I can still advocate to my party about the issues in northern BC. Politics is about building those connections and those relationships to ensure that people are being heard. So regardless of the outcome, I look forward to continuing to be able to be that voice for northern BC.
And therein lies the difference when you add women to politics.
Exactly.
And you are young, but you're not the youngest candidate running in the province. My understanding, there's a 17-year-old candidate for the Greens somewhere in the province.
Just turned 18, I think. She just turned 18.
Yeah,
she just turned 18, yes. Within the BC NDP, there are 4 candidates that are under the age of 25. There are 2 19-year-olds running. I'm the youngest female running for the BC NDP. Not the youngest female provincially at all, in any case. But yeah, 4 under the age of 25, which is really exciting. And then a few other younger candidates as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I was on a radio show the other week and we had Eric Allen saying it's time for younger candidates, which surprised the heck out of us, didn't it, Tracy?
You know what? It's just the truth. You know, when you look at what's happening south of the border and you have geriatric folks running a government, I mean, they're my parents' generation. I'm Gen X. So you are in Gen Z, I think, Laura, because my kids are, I don't know where everybody is. I can't keep it all.
On the edge, Gen Z and millennial.
But when you figure, I grew up before the internet. My parents definitely grew up before the internet. And my dad still can't figure out how to drive a cell phone. So I don't know that I want those people making the kinds of decisions that are being made. Things are changing far too quickly. So I absolutely think that it's time for youth. I mean, there's nothing against experience, because I also, the older I've gotten, I just am about to turn 51. There really is value in all of those years of experience. When I was 25, I would have totally turned my nose up at that. But as I'm getting older, I'm recognizing that I make better decisions because of my life experience. But I don't want to be making those decisions at 70. So I agree. We need youth and we need young voices.
Absolutely. And in that world of experience, this is a world of experience that you're getting running on this campaign, I'm sure. Talking a little bit about the campaign, you were involved in other campaigns. So how is campaigning in a COVID world different?
Oh, there's so many ways. One of the things I really miss is door knocking. When I volunteered with Bobby Deepak in 2017, I used to go and do like hundreds of doors a day every evening. I think Bobby said a few weeks ago, he's like, yeah, I think between the two of us, we walked thousands of doors together. You don't get to do that with a pandemic. So that's really hard. I kind of miss having those face-to-face interactions. And those are the chances that as a candidate, you really get to hear about what issues matter to people. So we can't do that, but we're finding other ways to engage with voters. Phone calls, handing out leaflets, doing digital events, different ways that we can kind of work on that and continue to build our connectivity. I know one thing that I struggled with, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, was feeling connected to the world around me. You know, you feel very isolated and very separate, and all those social supports that we usually have kind of just melted away for a little bit. And that's really, really hard in a time where we need to band together and work together. We can't do that physically, so let's find other ways to do it. So things like your talk panel are a really, really great way of doing that, and continuing to make voters aware of issues, keep people informed, discuss things, work it out, and approach things a little bit differently. So it's a different campaign. I have a whole collection of masks that I wear at different occasions now. I have like a Monday mask and a Tuesday mask and like a favorite mask and masks with different outfits and things. But yeah, finding ways to make it work.
That's funny. They're the new lapel pin. You swap them depending on which community you're in and what event.
Yeah. They're who thought that was going to be our reality, that, you know, you have masks that match different things, and like you said, it's like a lapel pin.
Yeah, and
that's funny.
There was a news story out this morning saying we're not washing our masks often enough if we have cloth masks, and we're reusing disposable ones, which we shouldn't be doing. So when you do have your mask,
every night, every single day, you wash that mask.
Yes.
Yes.
I read
of course I do. Yeah.
I read another really, really great article by a doctor. It was like an academic article, and they said the biggest difference that people can make is storing your masks when you're not wearing them in a paper bag as opposed to a plastic bag, because that allows the mask to breathe. So I thought that's a super easy thing I can do during the day. When the mask's on and off, just put it in a paper bag.
Right on. Good.
There's an MLA, there's an MLA, Bowen Ma, in North Vancouver, and she has this really cool, what she calls a Bowen Ma-bile, and it's an electric bike, and she has fold up and down plexiglass sides, so she can stand behind a plexiglass thing and still meet with voters, which is super cool. I love the initiative.
That's interesting. Super. Well, we're getting close to time. If Tracy, you got any more questions or comments for Laura?
Just, you're in the home stretch there, Laura. I've been there. I'm very glad I'm not there this time. So we all are supporting the fact that all of the candidates are out there trying to serve this community, and that's the only reason anybody puts their name in. So thank you for being willing to serve, and thanks for putting yourself out there. It's a scary thing to do, and I applaud you for it.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you for being here today. Thanks, Bill, so much for hosting. I really appreciate the questions and the opportunity to kind of present myself and voice my concerns and my thoughts, and it's really, really great to have this platform.
Well, super. Well, thanks for taking part. It's hopefully in the new Zoom world, this is part of our democracy now these days, hopefully. But it's all part of hopefully people getting to know all the candidates. We will be back next week with our regular panel. I believe Chuck Nisbet will be back again next week, and probably Todd Corrigal, and we'll do a post-mortem on the election. In the meantime, get out and vote on Saturday. Make sure you vote if you haven't voted already. And once again, thank you to Laura Parent, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Bye, Laura.
Bye.
Bye.